Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'll kick off the meeting with who I am. So, as mentioned, my name is Sierpiński. I've been working in the gaming industry for over a decade, primarily as a Unity developer. And I've been mostly working on RPG and RTS titles. Here's a couple of games I was working on. And I'm currently working at Stream, where we provide software and infrastructure for communication systems. And we do it on massive scale. We power chats for over 2 billion users. We also develop plugins for Unity and Unreal. And we do support indie developers community. If you're working on a small team with a small funding, you can apply for a maker account to use our services for free. So, you know a little about me. Now let me learn something about you. So could you please raise your hand if you ever used an in-game communication when you played a multiplayer game? Wow, that's most of the people here. And could you please raise your hand if you're working on a game right now that will involve some form of players' communication? Okay, one person, that's good. So first, let's cover quickly the scope of this talk. We'll go through different forms of in-game communication. We'll talk the pros and cons of each. Then we'll go to a few examples, proceed to players' toxicity and what you can do about it. And we'll talk about whether you should build an in-house solution or consider using a third-party plugin. So let's talk about chats. They're everywhere. Chances are there isn't a single person at this conference that is not using a chat application on a daily basis. But let's look at a couple of numbers to really appreciate the scale of this phenomenon. So in WhatsApp only, there's being 100 billion messages being sent every single day. That's a lot. That's roughly the same amount as the number of stars we have in our galaxy. And it's double the amount of birds there's on our planet. So basically, text messaging plays a significant role in our everyday life, so it's no surprise that it plays a significant role in games as well. About 80% of players declare that they do communicate with other players when playing games. More than 80% players have found some friends because of the games or gaming community. More than 40% of players did found a good friend or even a life partner in a game, okay? And this is all, so basically, in-game communication and communities around games have a huge impact on our social lives. So why would you even consider having a chat in your game? There's numerous benefits on what chats can bring to your games. It can facilitate teamwork. It can allow players to coordinate their actions by using communication. It can enhance social aspects of your game and contribute to the community building of your game. It can also improve players' experience, and it can become a critical or very important part of the gameplay. So let's quickly glance through over the most common types of chats. You can have them in all sorts of flavors. You can have global chats, group chats, lobby chats. The party chat concept was introduced by Fortnite. It is basically a concept that you get constantly connected to a group of your friends, regardless whether you're sharing the same game session or not. You can also organize your players in any sort of groups, like clans, guilds, any form of this social division of your community. So usually, when you think about in-game communication, the biggest question that is being raised is whether you should go with a voice communication or a chat communication. And this choice can be a bit intimidating. It's important to understand that text and voice communication is not always interchangeable, okay? They are different tools in your toolbox, and if you correctly understand the characteristic and pros and cons of each, you'll be able to pick the right communication that fits your game. So first, let's talk a bit about voice communication. What are the positive impact of voice communication inside a game. So first of all, it is a very efficient form of communication. It doesn't interrupt the gameplay. It doesn't require player to stop playing the game because they can communicate constantly. It's much faster and it's really effective form of communication. And this makes it really excellent option for VR games and console games, okay? Because without keyboard, it's a bit cumbersome to type messages. It's a bit inconvenient. If you have a VR game and you have like this sticker controllers, it's really difficult to type messages, okay? So if you're going for a VR or a console game, you should definitely consider voice communication as a first option. It's also really good for fast-paced games because with fast-paced games, you simply have no time to type, okay? The action can be really tense. You cannot, if you would be switching between gameplay and a chat window, this can cost you a life in a game. Let's look at the social impact. So voice is a lot more intimate and a lot more personal, and it does convey emotions, okay? So this all makes players to socialize more when using voice communication than they would be when using text. It's also a lot more personal, and it's super fun with friends because you don't only communicate about what's going on in games, but you can also share emotions and share the laughs and basically hang out and share their experience. Let's take a look at some gameplay impact. So voice communication can improve the cooperation and teamwork within the game. If you're building the game that relies heavily on player communication, maybe you divide players into groups that need to work together, voice communication can be a great addition. It can also add a lot of realism. Think about survival games or tactical shooters. This gives players a lot of opportunity to really get into character, and really it adds some realism to the game. As I mentioned, it's a great option when you require players to cooperate. But it's important to understand that there are no perfect solutions. Each solution is always a trade-off, and it's important to understand both the positive aspects and also the negative aspects so that you can pick the solution that works best for you. So first of all, voice communication is not always possible. If you're working on a mobile game, maybe a bit casual with short gameplay sessions that you tend players to play whenever they have spare few minutes, like maybe they're traveling on a bus or something. If you will require them to communicate through voice to coordinate action, this may be inconvenient in some cases, okay? Because you cannot use voice communication wherever you are. It's also a lot more challenging to moderate. So when it comes to text communication, there's a whole lot we can do automatically. We can detect whether players are using some profanities, whether they're being offensive. Theoretically, this is also possible with voice because we could technically transcript what they're saying and try to analyze it, but this is a lot more challenging technically. The transcription is not always perfect, and also because voice is a much richer means of communication, it is possible for players to be offensive and abusing solely by using their tone or maybe just making weird noises, which can be abusive, and those would be very difficult to detect automatically. Also, voice communication doesn't work well with large groups. If you want to implement voice communication and have large groups, you should probably consider doing something like a proximity chat. This means that the player would be connected, would be able to communicate only with the players that are very close to him. It will be based on the distance. It's also usually the most expensive way of in-game communication, unless you would encourage your community to use something like a Discord, which is a free solution. Another disadvantage, there's a couple of social disadvantages that you should be aware as well. Voice communication can be distracting to some people, and it depends also on the type of game you're building. If you're building a game where you require players to focus heavily on what's going on, this could be not possible if there would be other people constantly talking, right? This would be very distracting. Also, you need to be aware that some people are just not comfortable with talking to strangers. It's a much higher psychological barrier. Maybe you have a multinational group of players and they just don't know the language. Maybe they're simply ashamed of their accent or they have a social anxiety. You need to be aware that voice communication is always a lot more exclusive than a text communication would be. It can potentially also disturb immersion, okay? If you want to build a game that relies heavily on a good music or a voice acting, if you want those to be the selling points of your game, this doesn't play along with voice communication, okay? Because the players would interfere listening to music or a voice acting. It's also worth to point out that toxic behavior is much more annoying with voice communication than it would be with text. Let's move on to text communication. First, the advantages. So first of all, text communication can work really well if you have a multi-language audience, okay? Because technically wise, it's very simple to implement automatic translations. For instance, at Stream, we do out-of-the-box translation to top 20 popular languages. So the final effect that you can achieve is that every player types message in his own native language, and he sees messages from other players being automatically translated to his language based on the setting of his device or maybe in the player settings. Okay, so language barrier is almost like not occurring in this example. Another thing is that text communication is a lot easier to moderate, and this is simply because there's a lot of automatic options that are available for us. The most basic one is the block list. This means that you have a predefined list of profanities, of words that you wish players to not use. And if you detect that player is using one of them, you simply discard the message and not send it, not show it to other players. There's also a lot of options that are like context-based and AI-driven. This means that, players can be abusive even without any particular profanities, okay? Because the structure of a sentence can be offensive without using any bad words, okay? And AI moderation can pick this up. And it's worth pointing out that any form of automatic moderation is usually a lot cheaper than having humans to moderate the discussions. It's also worth noting that text communication is an asynchronous form of communication, okay? That means that if you're going after mechanics like building clans mechanics or clubs, it is not a problem if a player types a message and gets a response from other player many hours later, okay? If you're going for a voice communication, you usually have to implement some kind of regionalization. You have to group players by a region so that they get usually matched from the people of the same time zones. So it's not an issue that people play at different times of the day. It's also a relatively cheap option. Social impact. So as we've mentioned, text communication is not as engaging as voice communication, but if you throw in a couple of fancy features, it can be really fun for players as well. If you add some stuff like reactions, emojis, sticker, GIFs, this can be really fun for players as well. Also, text communication, as I've already mentioned, has a much smaller psychological barrier. Okay? A lot more people will get involved in the text discussion than they would be in a voice discussion. Because if you think about it, voice communication gives out a lot of personal information about us. Okay? For instance, if you talk on a phone with a stranger for the first time, you can immediately probably recognize what's the gender, what's more or less the age, what country does this person come from, and maybe something a bit about the personality, like how confident is this person. Voice gives out a lot of information about us, and this is why it forms a higher psychological barrier to use. Let's look at some disadvantages of text chat. So text communication is not always practical and not always convenient. You can't both play the game and type in a chat. So think about fast-paced games when the action can be really intense. You cannot require players to switch between playing and the chat window. Okay, this may not be always convenient. Also, as I mentioned, if you're aiming for a VR consoles or basically consoles like PS5, Xbox, where you have a simple gamepad, it is also very inconvenient to type stuff. Text is not as engaging as voice, but you can try to improve it with fun features like reactions, GIFs, emojis, and stuff like that. It's also worth noting that because there is a smaller psychological barrier and we remain more anonymous when texting, players tend to be also a bit more arrogant and toxic. Okay, it's easier to be arrogant when typing than it is when using voice communication. There are two other forms of players' communication that I wanted to show you, just to trigger your imagination. The first one is the ping system from Apex Legends. So this is a very simple communication system. It allows you to put a colored marker on a map with a predefined color label, okay, that has a particular meaning, like you spotted an enemy, you found an ammo, you found like a gun that others can pick. If you think about it, this is essentially a very simplified form of a text chat. The only difference is that the messages are predefined, are being further enhanced with a map position, and are being immediately sent to the private channel of your friends with the group you're playing within this game session. Now, what's interesting about this, it's like Apex Legends primarily relies on voice communication, but such a simplified form of textual communication is a great addition because it removes communication redundancy, okay? It would be a bit tiresome for players to repeat the same stuff over and over again, okay? If like 50 times per game session, you would have to say, oh, here's an ammo, here's a gun, here's a different gun, oh, there's an enemy, okay? This is like a great addition that simplifies communication and at the same time is very convenient. Another example I wanted to show you is a Hearthstone. How many of you know the game Hearthstone or have played? Wow, a lot, almost everybody. So for those of you who haven't, this is a cards game, a multiplayer mobile game where you battle with a random opponent. You play with your deck of cards. Okay, something. Is it on my side? Oh, okay. Sorry, I must have hit the wrong button. You play a card that represents a unit or a spell. It's basically a turn-based game where you have a little over a minute for each turn. Interesting about this game is that if they would place a small chatting window on the side, it would be a bit inconvenient because this is a strongly logical game. You need to really, many times, this little over 1 minute is not enough to make a move because you need to consider a lot of combinations of the potential outcomes or what is the best choice you have. But at the same time, you still want to communicate with other opponent because you want to share what you feel about his move. Maybe you're angry, maybe you're like, you think he made a really good move. You want to share those emotions. So this system of predefined shouts works really great. And what's really interesting about it is that even such a simplified system that allows you to pick one shout out of 10 can still be abused because player can hit the same shout over and over and over again, which can be a bit annoying. Okay, so even in such a simple form of communication, it is still important to allow players to mute the opponent. Now, if I could give you one tip today, it would definitely be that you should try to incentivize players' communication, okay? Players should have a good reason to communicate with others. It should serve a purpose. They should have some kind of benefits if they would be talking to others. And a great example I know that does it really well is the Clash Royale. How many of you know the Clash Royale game? Okay, only a few people. So this is a mobile multiplayer game. It's also a card game where each card represents a unit or a spell. You basically have these simplified battles that last maybe 10, 15 minutes. You upgrade your units and spells by collecting cards, which you get from chests. You win chests by winning battles. A huge part of this game is a clan mechanics, which is completely separate from this battle window. This is the primary window of your clan. It is essentially a chat discussion with a couple of more options. But the way they are being combined is really interesting. Okay, what you can do within a clan is that you can request and donate cards, you can share your deck, you can play friendly battles with clan members without risking your rank. And there's also this concept of clan wars, where there's many battles between clans and you can win rewards for the whole clan. Each of every this action stimulates a player discussion, okay? Because if you coordinate each of these actions with other players, you will get benefits. So first of all, if you share your deck with the team members, if you talk about it, if you try it out in a friendly battle, you can learn from others, okay? So by talking to other players, you improve your skills and you get better and you get a higher ranking score. You basically improve in this game. Requesting cards. Obviously, you could just blindly request cards and not really care. But if you request a card that other players cannot donate to you, then you just wasted a request, okay? And each request has a timeout. So if you coordinate this, what other people can donate to you, then you can really benefit from it, okay? Also, this game has this concept of card rarity. You have common cards, epic cards, legendary cards. Legendary are obviously very difficult to obtain, but maybe some of the clan members are not going after the same legendary cards that you are. Maybe they're constructing different decks, and the way the game is structured is that you don't really use all of your cards. You only use the sum depending on the type of decks you're building. So maybe you can discuss with other clan members to do a trade-off on legendary cards, and you can strongly benefit by doing it, okay? So by talking, you can get better cards. Also, whenever there's a clan wars, many clan owners, the clan leaders, get really into character and motivate all of the members to really put their efforts together when fighting over the other clans. So each of those mechanics can strongly improve your gameplay when you talk to others. There's also one more awesome example I wanted to show you of a game that's using chat as a core mechanics. How many of you know the game Among Us? Okay, almost everyone. That's astonishing. So if someone doesn't know this game, it's an online multiplayer game when you're basically the whole team becomes a crew on a spaceship, and one player gets randomly picked as an imposter. And the whole job of an imposter is to kill everyone on the spaceship. You might be tempted to think that this is a macro platformer game, but it's actually not. This is the core gameplay, right? This is where the whole entertainment happens, because whenever a crew member finds a dead body, he can call the meeting, and the discussion begins on who knows what. We combine our information and we try to pick who is the imposter, because every round we vote who will be thrown out from the ship to the outer space and die. And this is the place where imposter uses social engineering techniques, deception, lying, when they try to convince other players that he is not the imposter, that someone else is, to survive to the final round. Really great game. You should play it if you haven't. Okay, so we've talked about how communication inside games can benefit your game in various ways. But it all comes with a challenge. And the primarily challenge that you'll be facing is the player's toxicity. So again, let's take a look at some numbers to really know the scale of the problem. By the way, if you're always curious where the numbers come from, there's always a source at the bottom of the slides. The slides will be available to download. So astonishingly, about 70% of players have experienced a toxic behavior. About 20% do experience it often or almost every time. And what's also important is that more than 90% of players believe that solutions should be implemented in order to reduce this phenomenon, okay? So players expect that you do something about it, that you manage the community that you're building. There's also two things I wanted to point out on this slide. The most important are the top left, the two on the very left side of the slide. So the first thing is that almost 25% of people will use in-game reporting whenever they encounter a toxic behavior. This is actually great news for you because those players will contribute into moderation effort. They will help you to manage the community, and all you have to do is give them a small option to report another player and maybe provide some additional information on what exactly is the problem. Another important thing is that almost 25% of players will leave the game if they are becoming a victim of a toxic behavior. This can cause you lose players, okay? And the whole point of building community and nurturing them with a communication system was to have more players and more happy players, okay? Not having them quit. So what can you do about it? So first of all, the fundament is that you need to have a clear guidance and clear rules on what is acceptable and not, okay? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you take different actions with different users, and then community starts to accusing you that they're just simply not being fair. And this usually creates a distance between you and the community, and this is not what you want. It's critical to allow players to shield themselves from a toxic behavior. So you need to have systems, players need to be allowed to disable the chat, to mute other players, to mute channels. They need to be able to immediately stop whatever the other person is doing whenever they feel uncomfortable, okay? This is very important. Also, another important factor is fast detection, okay? You can incorporate it by having reporting system. As we saw on the previous slide, almost 25% of players will use reporting systems whenever they encounter toxic behaviors. Also, you should seek ways of automatic moderation because it is usually the easiest and cheapest way to control and manage the community. The fundament is the block list. This is a technically extremely simple solution. You have a predefined list of bad words that players shouldn't use, and you try to detect them. Or you can seek for AI-based solutions that analyze a deeper context of what was being said. Let's quickly go through essential features. You can basically treat it as a checklist whenever you want to have a communication system in your game. So obviously, the moderation is the most important. You need to have systems for reporting, for muting, for banning by account. You can also consider having banning by IP. This can prevent toxic players for creating new accounts in order to bypass the banned account. This doesn't always work well because not every internet user has a fixed IP, but it still can be very helpful. You need to have permission systems because you want to have a different roles, and they need to be executed on the backend system because you never want users to discover what is the URL of banning a user and overuse this system by themselves. Also, if you're building a clan mechanics or a simple something similar like this, it's usually very common that you give the clan owners or the channel owners a little bit of control over community. So a small amount of moderation options so they can contribute and help you manage this small portion of community. Online status is also a standard nowadays. This simply shows who of your friends is online currently. It's also worth having an invisible option because sometimes people want to log in and not have everyone other know that they're being online. If you're going after text communication, you should consider doing reactions, emojis, stickers, and anything that's fun. Real-time synchronization simply means that that chat is very responsive, that messages are being delivered immediately. Because we are so used to using chat applications, it is often not acceptable for most of the players that there will be some kind of delay on the message. The last thing you might consider if it fits your game is commands, often also called as slash commands. These are special messages that are not being visible to other players, but they do trigger some kind of action within the game itself. OK, so let's say that you decided that you want to have some form of in-game communication. Now, the final decision is you have to make is whether you should build your in-house solution or just take a third-party plugin. So let's first consider the advantages of building your own solution. Obviously, whenever you build something in-house, you have the most control over it. You have the full control over features and customization. If you buy a third-party plugin, it's not always possible to customize it graphically. It may not always be possible. So sometimes you may be forced to roll out your own UI solution and UI kit. So this will drive like additional costs. You should be aware of that. In some cases, it can be also cheaper to build the solution yourself, especially if you have a small usage or if you don't need any extra features. Like if you decide that you just want to have a simple window with a text messages without any reactions, without any particular features, it can be simply cheaper to build it on your own. Also, whatever you build on your own is usually easier to integrate with your system. Now, disadvantages of building your own solution. So usually it's more expensive because you need to take the full cost of building the solution. If you just buy a third-party solution, usually the cost is spread across many customers and you simply pay for usage, not for creating the whole solution. It also takes time. It usually will take months or more, depending on what exactly you need, of course, but it will always take time. And it's not only about communication systems, but whatever feature you consider building on your own, you always need to be aware that this is a trade-off. So you're always taking away resources that you could focus on other parts of the game. And because communication systems are usually a side feature and not a selling point of your game, it might be more worth to focus those resources on the primary selling points of your game. Also, if you decide to build something on your own, the maintenance is on your shoulders. So you have to have a crew that will monitor the solution and make sure that everything works. Advantages of buying a third-party solution. So usually it's faster time to market. Whenever you buy something ready, the integration is within a few weeks. It's also easier to scale because vendors are usually prepared to take any kind of traffic. All you have to do, you don't need to worry about servers and scaling the infrastructure behind it. Usually, going with a third-party solution is a cheaper option to start because, as I already mentioned, you don't need to take the cost of building the solution. You just pay for the usage. And what's often overlooked is that it's cheaper to exit. Okay, let's consider an example that for some reason text chatting system didn't work out for your game. Maybe you haven't planned this out correctly. Maybe you just threw in a chat window in your game. You see that players are not using it, and you decided, okay, let's throw it out. If you build it on your own, then you basically paid for the whole cost of producing a feature that you are no longer using. But if you have decided to go with a third party, you just cancel a subscription and it's done. It's also usually more stable and reliable because it was already tested by some other customers. Now, the advantages of going with a third-party solution. In some cases, it can be more expensive, so it's always good to really think about what will be your usage of the systems, how many features will you be using, and really analyze it. Often the case could be that the lowest plan exceeds your needs. If you have very small needs, basically the way it works is that vendors offer predefined and fixed pricing plans, and you just have to pick one, okay? If it's something that doesn't fit your needs, then you might be paying too much for it. Also, there are cases where there's a seasonal activity. Some games are oriented around sporting events or something like that. This means that they have a huge spikes of players a couple of times a year, but many months they have no traffic at all. In such cases, third-party solution can turn out to be very expensive. There can be potential integration issues. So whenever you're integrating a third-party solution, there can be certain issues, okay? Maybe there's no plugin that was made for the engine that you have picked. Maybe the plugin was created for an old version of the engine, and now if you try to upgrade it, you run into issues. Usually fixing something in a third-party solution is much more challenging than it is in your in-house solution. Technical support is out of your control. This is often an advantage if everything works fine, because you don't need to care about a case when something doesn't work out for your players. But if the vendor doesn't care as well, then you have a huge problem, because there's nothing you can do. Also, whenever you go with a third-party solution, you need to take into account the worst scenario, that the vendor can drop the product or can simply go out of business. And this puts you in a very difficult position, because usually this may involve losing data or losing control over this feature. So let's move to the key takeaways. Chats can really benefit your games. They can drive the engagement and really nurture your community. And as we all know, a strong community can really increase the game popularity. Think about the chat as a feature, okay? You need to figure out how it plays along with other features you have. What benefits will it give to the players? Try to give players a purpose on why they should communicate with each other. Also try to pick the type of communication that really works with your game, okay? Think about who will play it, when, how fast is the gameplay, what controls. These are factors that you should take into account when picking the right system that works with your game. Moderation is obviously critical. Try to aim for automatic moderation, because it's usually cheaper. Also, if you properly care about your community, you may find that there is a lot of volunteers that will help you out with the moderation if you give them the right options. You need to have reporting system and muting options down so that players can shield themselves. Often, general and big public chats don't work really well. They tend to be toxic and unutilized. Try to focus on smaller groups. This usually makes players more socialized and more likely to get friends. All right, thank you. I hope that was informative for you, and it will help you in building communication systems in your games. Now, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much for a deep journey into the game chatting. And the question would be the following. Let's imagine the game, which is not super popular right now, so it's a kind of like really a start of the release, and we don't have the game. Okay, not we. The game doesn't have that much investment on the moderation, but we really want our players to feel really comfortable within the chat. So the game is mid-core game with the clans, and the chat actually is within a clan. And there are 20 people in the clan, and the system that we have right now makes the moderation the following way. If 5 of those 20 people report a message, therefore, automatically the person will be banned. So what would be your idea and your suggestions to make the better moderation in these circumstances we have? Thank you.
Thanks. So it's hard to just jump right in such a specific case. So you have an automatic moderation, but it doesn't work, right? So whenever they flag a message, the player gets automatically banned. Okay, so this is the kind of case that it's really hard to give like a universe numbers that work for every case, because it strongly depends on the community you have. It can even be different from country to country, because in different cultures there will be different type of toxic, and people can act differently and differently perceive what's being toxic for them or not. So I think you just need to like try out different strategies and like see what number of reports works good for you. And maybe if you have like these clan owners, maybe try giving them some moderation options and be more open for volunteers, because if you have a thriving community, then a lot of people will want to be moderators and do share some of the load with you. Yeah, but regarding the numbers, I think you should just experiment with a couple of stuff. So you see what was being banned, and you see if it was like justified or not, and you try find the sweet spot. So it's really hard to recommend, but just try out a couple of options. Yeah, thanks.
One more question.
Thank you, Daniel. I got a question regarding voice chat breaking immersion in the game. So have you ever encountered solutions like audio middleware or using the game engine to put the actual player's voice into the same environment the other sounds are? So like the players hear themselves and their opponent, for example, in the game environment. And are those solutions really better than Discord or like the simple voice chat?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what was the drift.
If you put the player's voice inside the game environment, and you hear every voice like from real people, you hear in the game environment. For example, if there is a wall in front of you, and there is a player behind that wall, you will hear it muffled voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm talking about things like that. And does it really make a lot of difference from simple Discord chat or something that wouldn't use that game environment?
In the environment. So you're basically saying if Discord versus in-game voice communication, is this what you're asking?
Something like that. Yeah, I'm talking mostly about VR and console games where the immersion is like crucial for those. And if you put a simple in-game chat which won't belong into the game environment, it would be like I think it would be the same as Discord chat, right? So I'm just looking for a solution for the VR game where the player will actually feel themselves in the environment. But I'm thinking that maybe that wouldn't be that convenient for them to communicate, because sometimes they won't be able to hear what their opponent says. So what are the pros and the cons of such an approach?
Wow, another very difficult example. So I guess it's also hard to jump on this example. You just need to like experiment with few approaches and see what works for you. So I think the critical part is that you always try to stay in touch with community and see what works them, because every game community is very different. So you cannot just like apply a golden strategy and the same strategy will not work in all of the games. So I think it's really critical that maybe you have like a Discord channel and you try to ask players what works for them. Maybe you do some polling, and you need to extensively test it on your own and try to figure out if it makes sense.
Okay.
I guess that's all I can recommend.
Do we have more questions? Okay, then there will be one for me. Daniel, have you encountered like hybrid schemes of chats, something like chat with additional voice input from one side and synthetic voice for sounding the text from the other side? And what do you think, can it be beneficial for the games?
Can you explain it a bit more?
So basically, we have like people who have problems with typing or just don't want to do it because the game is dynamic, and they can use like a voice chat, but it will be automatically transferred to text, maybe moderated, and so on, and voiced from the different party. That's supposed to hear this text, and also it can be like, I don't know, player can set his identity to be voiced in different types, and we have a synthetic, we have a hybrid scheme when it is basically a text chat, but it has voice input and output. Have you encountered this, and do you think can it be beneficial for the industry?
Well, I think that any form of experimenting with new technologies can be beneficial. Personally, I haven't encountered such a complex system as you've mentioned, but maybe this is because we provide ready solutions for voice or text communication, so we don't have customers experiment that much with the technology. So usually they just integrate a ready solution that works in a certain way. But the case that you have described certainly is like very interesting, and I would definitely love to learn more about it.
Because we all want to live in the future, and new technologies help ourselves. Like, I don't know, even voice commands in the game. Why not?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I would really love to learn more about this particular case.
Okay, bye.